Hello and welcome. You're watching Global Lens. I'm Parikshit Luthra. Global markets face the heat as US President Donald Trump announces new tariff rates ranging from 10% to 40% for 92 countries, including India, who haven't secured a trade deal yet. These rates will take effect on August 7th. Back in April, Trump claimed to have done 200 deals in an interview with Time magazine. His advisor Peter Navarro claimed that 90 days would be possible till the 9th of July. But here's how things stand as of August 1st. Only 8 deals have been done in 120 days. The United Kingdom was the first country to clinch one back in May with 10% tariffs, with 15% tariffs. The European Union, Japan and South Korea are also among the countries with a trade deal. China had managed to get some respite on tariffs in a deal with US, but talks for a full-fledged one are still ongoing. As per Trump's latest announcement, India's tariffs of 25% are higher than its neighbors. Bangladesh's rate has been reduced from 35% to 20%. Pakistan faces a 19% tariff and Afghanistan is the lowest with 15%. India is also staring at the highest tariff rate among developing economies in Asia. Vietnam faces 20%, while Malaysia, Indonesia and Philippines also face a 19% tariff rate. Among the BRICS nations, South Africa has the highest tariff rate of 30%. President Trump has imposed only a 10% tariff on Brazil, despite defiance from Brazil's President Lula. Russia is currently under US sanctions, and there is no meaningful business activity between both nations. There are a handful of countries facing higher tariffs than India. Canada has been hit with a 35% tariff, which has drawn a protest from Prime Minister Mark Carney. Switzerland is in shock after Trump imposed a 39% tariff. The US has flagged 3 irritants with India in trade negotiations. Number 1, India is a part of BRICS, an organization that has been actively looking to reduce its reliance on the US dollar. Number 2, India's defense and oil purchases from Russia. And number 3, India's refusal to lower duties on agriculture and dairy imports. Joining us now to discuss the implications of Trump's move is Carlos Gutierrez, former Commerce Secretary of the United States. Mr. Gutierrez, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me. Pleasure.
Can the India-US trade deal still be clinched? And what will it take to clinch the deal from this all-time low in relations?
Well, it's interesting that the way you put it, because 4 or 6 weeks ago, we would have said it's at the all-time high. But I think there are 2 ways to look at this. One is strategic. And India is at a bit of a crossroads right now from a strategic point of view, because what President Trump is asking for is right at the heart of India's strategies. On foreign policy, India is very much non-aligned, and India has always been that way. India gets along with everyone. So it's Russia, it's Iran, it's other countries. And now, of course, the president is challenging India's membership of BRICS, purchases from Russia, that aspect of it. And then there's the domestic policy, which is, a certain level of that's always been of domestic concerns, domestic production, taking care of domestic industries. Swadeshi, as I think I pronounce it the way it's called in India. So those 2 things are really up for grabs right now. And I can imagine Prime Minister Modi's in a tough spot. I would say the tactical part that could go a long way is for more communication between the prime minister and the president. I know they talk, I know they're close, but this is something that I believe can only be sealed in a discussion between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump.
India was first off the block to start negotiations on a trade deal. We gave early concessions. We slashed tariffs on bourbon whiskey. We slashed tariffs on cars, including electric vehicles. We reduced a tax that was hurting companies like Google, Alphabet, Amazon, and others. And we were negotiating a trade deal. We were willing to give access to US industrial goods. What went so horribly wrong in the last few days that Donald Trump started using such language that I don't care about whether Russia and India go down together? They're dead economies anyway. We do very little trade with India, and India is a very high tariff jurisdiction. These are very strong words that the Trump White House used.
Well, and I hope that we consider them tactics. This is not a strategic uh, phrase. I don't think the president is willing to give up the future of U.S. India, but the expectations have increased. So the things that were agreed to perhaps were low hanging fruit, but now it's the big things that the president has wanted: more energy purchases, more weaponry, less business with Russia, which is part of the sanctions on Russia, the secondary sanctions. And India's caught up in that, and those are the big things. Of course, there are tariffs on exports from the U.S. As you mentioned, autos and agriculture, especially. But now the big things that have come into play are of a geopolitical nature: energy purchases and India's non-aligned posture, which is, again, it's a very important part of India's foreign policy, but that is being challenged. And that's why I think that on a strategic level, the prime minister is being, put on the spot. But I do think that a lot of this can be resolved by more communication between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump.
Right. What do you think about the bonhomie between US and Pakistan? The president was all praise for Pakistan, saying that we're going to have a great deal, we're going to develop Pakistan's oil reserves, we'll choose a company. How will all this come about? How is a trade deal with Pakistan even beneficial to US?
Well, and I think we have to look at that again through the lens of the current situation. I don't believe it is a major geostrategic change, but it's something that caught a lot of people by surprise. It was a very swift move that the president made to reach an agreement with Pakistan, knowing, of course, that that may put pressure on India. So tactically, it was incredibly swift, and it caught a lot of people by surprise. But I wouldn't see it as a major strategic shift. I think it's a shift at the moment that serves the current negotiations.
Right. Mr. Gutierrez, you spoke about India's non-aligned posture, and possibly this is something that is triggering the Trump administration. That on one hand, you want to have long-term strategic ties with the United States, but you want to maintain a relationship with Russia at its own level. You continue talking to China to balance ties at its own level as well. China is our adversary, but we're trying to manage the relationship. Is there something also strategically also going wrong? Is there some sort of frustration? Or have things come to a point where the US is now actually saying that for 20, 25 years, we've tried to invest a lot in this partnership, but we need greater political alignment? Is that the message, underlying message of these tensions?
Well, that looks like it's part of the message. That the dramatic part would be that India is being asked to choose sides, and that's a major turning point, and that's a major challenge to India's world doctrine. And there's an aspect of it that because India and the U.S. are growing closer, that there is a stronger friendship. That it's not to the U.S.'s detriment that India get along with other people, because that tends to balance things out. So I think it is a moment where the U.S. has to decide beyond this trade negotiation what India's role is in the world structure, beyond tariffs. So yes, it's a very important point in the sense that is the U.S. saying, India, you have to pick sides? And that, again, I think that is the major challenge uh, to Prime Minister Modi, and how to maneuver out of that. And I go back to, the lessons here is the relationship with President Trump. It's a very good relationship. And Prime Minister Modi has done a great job to reach out and try to get closer. That I believe is the only way out of this.
Okay, I would also like to ask you, sir, now, what is the legal sanctity of these trade deals that are being signed? I found a statement by a South Korean leader very interesting. He said that there was no time for a written text. This was an oral trade agreement. We've not heard of oral trade agreements earlier. So what would you say about the larger sanctity? Because, trade negotiators are saying that, US is saying that they're getting a $550 billion investment from Japan, $350 billion investment from South Korea. But orally?
Yeah, that's an important point, because if you take, for example, USMCA, Canada, Mexico, the tariffs are on products that are not compliant with that USMCA. So the sanctity of that agreement is being respected. With Korea, it's all products, in spite of the fact, or regardless of the fact, that we have a trade agreement with Korea. So those are things that are really being thrown up in the air. And I would say the way that it's being justified is that all of these trade actions are considered a national security concern, national security emergency by the U.S. And that's the way it's being justified. But a lot of legal action is being taken place. As we've seen in the past, the president will find a way to either delay a decision and continue to appeal and raise it higher, even to a Supreme Court, um, or find other ways to impose or to exert influence or power on trade. So yes, it's a factor, but I think that the president will continue to move on, at least in the short term. It'll be hard to stop.
It will be hard to stop. And at what point do you think the US may impose a penalty on India? What could be the quantum of that penalty? How will he calculate that? Will it be contingent on the Russia-Ukraine talks outcome?
Well, that's an important question, because, as you know, the the president has threatened secondary tariffs on countries that do business with Russia, and that's primarily China, India, Iran, who buy energy from Russia. Um, the thing there, of course, those are very difficult sanctions to put in place. But if they were to be put in place, that is also a big sanction on China, at a time when US and China are trying to negotiate a very large agreement that is constantly getting larger and larger. So, and the tariffs is 100%. So that would be a major, major move. Um, if the tariffs worked, if this secondary tariff regime actually worked, it rarely does, but if it worked, that means the price of energy would increase substantially, the price of oil, which is something the president doesn't want. So that date has been moved forward. As you know, it's coming up in 7 or 8 days, and that's a very important date, because it's something that I don't think anyone wants. I don't think the U.S. wants it, India, Russia, China, but it's out there. But that's very important. I don't think it, can the president slap tariffs on India but not on China? Well, he seems to be able to do whatever he wants, and perhaps justify it in the sense that negotiations are going on with China, but they have broken down with India. So that's another variable. That plus BRICS is really what has become a very emotional topic in the last 3 to 4 weeks. To your question about what's changed, these geopolitical issues have become a lot more important.
Right. Carlos Gutierrez, always a pleasure having you on
Thank
CNBC
you.
TV 18. Thank you so much. You've given us a lot to think about, some very important points there on what the Indian businesses can expect over the next few weeks. We're taking a short
Thank
break
you.
here on Global Lens, but don't go anywhere. We continue our focus on Trump's tariff war on the other side with Ashok Malik of the Asia Group.